Hello everybody, thanks for joining us tonight. My name's Annie Everall I'm Director of Authors Aloud UK, and this is the third event that we've done today as part of the Reading Together Day, and it's my great pleasure to welcome the 2020 Carnegie Medal winner, Anthony McGowan. As I said, this is the final event of what's been an incredible day of activities, all celebrating reading together, that magical time when parents or grandparents with their children, sisters with their brothers, and even, as I said earlier, mums and dads with each other can share favourite books and stories and read together. So this event is in partnership with wonderful Barrington Stoke, Anthony's publisher, and ASCL, the Association of Senior Children's and Education Librarians. So let me introduce you to Anthony, although many of you, particularly the librarians in our audience, will know him very well and be very familiar with his books. He's the author of books for adults, including two of my favourites, The Art of Failing, Notes from the Underdog, which are a series of hilarious essays about sort of the incidents, probably rather forget, that happened during a year of your life, Anthony, and How to Teach Philosophy to Your Dog, which is an exploration of the teachings of history's most renowned philosophers, presented as a series of conversations between himself and his dog Monty. And I think lots of us have fallen in love with Monty from reading and hearing about him on your Facebook posts. He's the author of novels for children and young adults, including The Knife That Killed Me, which was also made into a movie and longlisted for the Carnegie Medal in 2008. For Henry Schumer, which won the 2006 Book Trust Teenage Prize. Hello Darkness, the Bear Bum Gang series, which I think is the title of the series that gets most kids laughing quickest, Project X series, and the Donut Diaries series, and of course the brilliant Truth of Things series. Brock, which was longlisted for the Carnegie in 2014, Pike, Rook, which was shortlisted in 2018, and Lark, for which, as I said earlier, he's just won this year's Carnegie Medal. So can we offer our huge and well-deserved congratulations, Tony? And then let me hand over to you, and you're going to talk to us for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up for chat and questions. Over to you, my friend.
Oh, hello, thank you, Annie, for that. That was really, really lovely. Yeah. So I suppose what I was going to talk about today was broadly a bit about my early career, a bit how that segued into writing the Truth of Things series. I might do a reading or two, and then I'm hoping that there'll be some interesting questions, challenging, controversial questions in an ideal world. Yeah, so I've been writing books now for about 20 years as my job, a bit longer than that. And I was trying to count up the other day how many books I've actually written. It's somewhere between 40 and 50. I kept losing count. Trying to remember how many girlfriends you've had. Is it actually 13? It's not that many. And if you look at my kind of early works for teenagers in particular, I think there's a kind of pattern there. My very first book for teenagers is a book called Hellbent. And it's a book about a teenager who dies and goes to hell. And it's so it's a kind of combination of his memories of being a tough comprehensive school in Leeds, combined with his experiences in hell. And it can almost set the template for my early teenage books. So it's quite a extravagant, complex comedy with a lot of quite rude jokes in it. But what you tend to get in Hellbent and my other early books is weird combination of rude jokes and philosophy, sort of filth and philosophy. So one of the kind of typical scenes in Hellbent is a scene where my main character Connor has been sent to hell for a thing you find out at the end. And one of his punishments is that when he goes to the toilet, he's got a variety of really horrendous things to wipe his bottom on. So there's a hedgehog and a porcupine, a tennis racket, and a violin and a jellyfish. And so it's meant to be a kind of gross out comedy of the human body, but it's also a parody of a scene in there's a French writer called Rabelais, 15th century writer who wrote a book called Gargantua and Pantagruel, and there's a famous scene there where the main character tries to find the softest thing to wipe his bottom on. And he finally concludes that the best thing to wipe your bottom on is the soft and downy neck of a goose. So that's a kind of typical early Anthony McGowan kind of chapter, where you combine that rude comedy of the human body with a slightly pretentious allusion to other texts. And so nearly all my early books, they have this kind of weird combination of kind of gritty realism with that philosophical or complex element. So my second book for teenagers is a book called Henry Schumer, which is a book about a teenage boy who starts to hear voices in his head. And it turns out that he's got a brain tumor which talks to him, and the brain tumor becomes a major character in the novel. And the narrator, Hector, is a bit of a nerd. He can't get a girlfriend. He's really uncool, and the brain tumor helps him to get a girlfriend, helps sort out his image, whilst also doing that thing that brain tumors do, which is to kill you. So it's a kind of gross out comedy about illness. But it's also a retelling of Henry IV, Part 1 by Shakespeare. So again, there's that kind of extra element of literary allusion, that intertextuality, which I try to get into my early books. So all those kind of books, as the Hellbent, Henry Schumer, The Night That Killed Me, and also the Hello Darkness, that they have this weird combination of realism and surrealism and body comedy and quite complex literary allusions, and that I always felt was my thing. That's what I did, that combination of filth and philosophy. But then about 10 years ago, I was at a book award, and I met a writer who'd been writing for Barrington Stoke, and she told me how great Barrington Stoke were, and I kind of built up a kind of connection there. And Barrington Stoke had always published books, initially I think aimed at dyslexic young people, but then slightly widened that to young people who were just reluctant readers. And so I formed a connection there, and I wrote a book for them called The Fall. And it was meant to be a quite simple, straightforward story, which was, I suppose, two linked stories, one of which was a horrific event involving bullying, one of which was an event involving animal cruelty. And I sent it off to Barrington Stoke, thinking that, as usual, it would be accepted as a reasonable kind of book. It came back covered in those blue pencil lines. All the typical Anthony McGowan flourishes just simply hadn't worked in that Barrington Stoke context. So I had to kind of pare back my prose to stop showing off. I kind of realized that a lot of my early books had been really me trying to declaim to the world how clever I was, how funny I was, how many other books I'd read, how good I was at complex metaphors. And writing for Barrington Stoke made me realize that perhaps there's a different way to write a book, that you just think about characters and plot and that setting, that world, what the writers really what the readers really want to hear. Although I kind of linking this back to my earlier way of thinking about writing, that I've always thought there were two paradigms for writing. That there are writers who think that the writing process is a purely internal kind of thing, that within you create this thing of beauty, and then you excrete it almost like an egg, like a Fabergé egg, then present it to the world. So it's all about finding your voice and finding the thing of beauty within yourself. I'd previously always thought that writing was a conversation, that essentially I always thought about my reader, and I'm saying, are you laughing? Are you frightened? Are you with me? Are you interested? Are you bored? If you're bored, I'm going to shout in your face some more. So I always had that kind of paradigm. Then I think that within that paradigm, I was slightly the mad person in the pub who sits next to you and grabs you and shakes you and engages with you, and then buys you a drink and always wants you to be fully fully focus on them. But when I started writing for Barrington Stoke, I still wanted to keep the idea that I'm thinking about the reader, but then I focused more on not showing off, on trying to think about what they really wanted. So the very first book I wrote for Barrington Stoke was called The Fall. This kind of deeply sad, tragic, in fact, book. And it kind of worked okay. But then I had the idea of again writing about. I suppose what I was trying to do with Barrington Stoke was somehow find truth. And truth had never been an important concept for me with my earlier books. What mattered to me was being funny or interesting or weird or strange. But with the Barrington Stoke books, I thought, how can I actually be true? Be true to the characters, be true to their world. And I thought about two central characters, who are the two central characters that go throughout the Truth of Things series, Nicky and Kenny. And their family background is terrible. Their mothers left home when they were quite young. Their fathers drinks too much, can't cope because the older brother Kenny has got moderate learning difficulties, and so his younger brother Nicky, who's the narrator of the series, has become Kenny's carer. And at the beginning of the first book, which is called Brock, they're at the absolute rock bottom. So they have no money. They live in desperate poverty. They're hungry a lot of the time. They're dressed in rags. They stink. But Nicky is a carer for Kenny, the older brother. And at the start of the first book, they're on the verge of being taken into care. So things are really, really, really bad. And in Brock, what happens right at the beginning is that the two brothers get sucked into a gang who have gone badger baiting. And they, which is where I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's where you take dogs out into the countryside, you find a badger set, you dig out the badgers, you set the dogs on the badgers, and it's a horrendous blood sport. But the brothers managed to save most of the badgers, and in particular, they save a baby badger, which they take home, and they nurture this baby badger, and that their father suddenly re-engages, and this begins a kind of healing process for the whole family. And so at the end of Brock, the first in the series, they've gone from a place of absolute darkness to a point at the end where they're still desperately poor, with a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. I suppose I wasn't entirely sure when I finished Brock if it would be a series or not. You never quite know. I had a vague idea that I wanted to carry on with this, but Brock did quite well. So then I wrote a second book about the brothers, a book called Pike. I might read a bit from Pike later on if we've got time. We'll see. But with Pike, the two brothers, they go on a fishing expedition and to the local kind of pond, and they find a dead body in the pond, which has around its wrist a gold Rolex watch, and so they decide they're going to try and get the watch off the body to try and help their family situation. The third book in the series, Rook, is so the family situation is slightly improved at this point. The dad's got a new girlfriend. Things are slightly looked up in their world. That they're still poor, but they're no longer hungry, which they were at the beginning. And in Rook, it's a bit like Brock. It begins where they find a rook, which is a kind of crow, which is being attacked by a sparrowhawk, and they look after they save the rook, and they can nurture it. But by the stage of Rook, the central relationship between Kenny and Nicky is slightly changed. Kenny's a really good special school. He's kind of blossoming in his own way, so he doesn't need Nicky quite so much in that same way he did at the beginning. And it's a mildly traumatic thing, because that central bond has been the point of Nicky's life up until that point. But suddenly, because Kenny's kind of okay, Nicky's allowed to have his own proper teenage problems. So he falls in love for the first time, and the huge complication there is that the brother of the girl that he's in love with is his main kind of tormentor and bully at his secondary school. So it's a kind of teenage romance tragedy kind of story. But again, at the end of it leads up to a slightly better point in their story. With each novel, the family slightly improves their situation, and that takes us on to the point of Lark, my Carnegie winning book. At the point of Lark, the family is more or less okay, and also they managed to track down their mother, who left home when they were quite young. She'd gone to Canada, and she's going to come back to visit them. So the two boys are incredibly excited and tingling with excitement about this whole thing. And their father suggests that they go for a walk on the North Yorkshire moors, just to take their mind off the impending arrival of their mother. And it's towards the end of winter, the beginning of spring. And all of the books have taken place in this small Yorkshire town, which is small town, big village, which was the place where I was brought up, a place called Schumer in Elmet. It's a real place. It's really there. All of the geographical locations in the books are real places. I literally walked in the footsteps of my characters. But with Lark, they decided to go on a trip to the North Yorkshire moors, based on the advice of their father, to try and find larks singing. And down the valley where they are, it's towards the end of winter, beginning of spring. The weather's okay, a bit drizzly, but they take two buses, and they find themselves in the North Yorkshire moors, and things are different up there. It starts to snow, the ground is frozen. They get lost. They take a shortcut, which leads to disaster in the typical Anthony McGowan kind of way. But I'm going to read a bit actually from the book now. So it's a prologue from the book, but they're already on the hillside in the North Yorkshire moors. I don't bloody like it. Language, Kenny, I said to my brother. You don't have to bloody well say bloody all the bloody time. It's not clever and it's not funny. I copied the whining voice of Mr. Kimball, our English teacher. But it was wasted on Kenny as he didn't go to my school. But it is bloody cold, Kenny said. I know. And we're bloody lost. I bloody know. I looked around. It had stopped snowing, but the path had almost vanished. I saw white fields and stone walls, the black skeletons of trees climbing out of the frozen earth. The sky was a sort of pale grey, like a seagull's back. In fact, the sky was the weirdest thing about it all. You couldn't see any clouds or any of the blue in between the clouds, just this solid grey nothing, like cold porridge going on forever. I had Tina, our Jack Russell, on the lead. She'd enjoyed the snow to begin with, snapping at it and chewing mouthfuls as if she'd caught a rat. But now she looked as fed up as us. She was getting on a bit, and the cold had got into her bones. And there's worser words than bloody, Kenny said. He had his big hands thrust into his pockets to hide them from the wind. There's this boy, like Milo, at my school, and he knows all of them. What? I snorted. He knows every bad word there is. Yeah. What, every bad word in the whole world? Yeah, of course, Kenny said. Well, maybe not in the world, but in England. Because, yeah, there might be bad words in other countries he doesn't know, like the Chinese for knob and the African for arse. African isn't a language, Kenny, I told him. It's not even a country. There are loads of countries in Africa and hundreds of languages, and they all have mucky words in them. Whatever, Kenny said, getting annoyed. But at least his mind wasn't on the snow and the cold and the mess we were in. Go on then, I said. What? These bad words that Milo told you. Let's hear them. You won't tell Dad or Jenny that I know them? Of course not. I'm not a grass. You told them where I hid the turkey? I had to, I said, otherwise there'd have been no Christmas dinner. Kenny nodded. You could see the logic in that. Okay then, Kenny said, right. And then Kenny told me all the dirty words he knew. It made us laugh, but not enough to warm us. Half the words weren't even real. Stuff like splonger and bozzle. I don't know if this Milo kid had said it for a joke or if someone had told him that nonsense and he just passed it on. The best was when Kenny said, a sod, do you know what that is? No, not really, I replied. It's one of the worst words there is. Even saying it gets you 1,000,000 years in hell. Right, a sod is a man who digs up dead bodies to have it off with. I'm not sure it is, Kenny, I said, spluttering. It is! And a daft sod is one who forgets his spade. And then I laughed so hard I cried, and snot came out of my nose. The tears and the snot were warm for a moment on my skin, and then cold. Cold. You're a daft sod, I said. Kenny shoved me, and I was laughing too much to keep my balance, and I fell over. Tina got excited for the first time in ages and barked and scampered around. I hit the ground and felt the snow under me, and under the snow, the hardness of the frozen earth. Then I realised just how much trouble we were in. I stood up and I brushed the snow off. I think Kenny was expecting me to push him back, so he was laughing but keeping his distance. Then Kenny saw my face and he stopped laughing. We better get off this hill, Kenny, I said, or we'll catch our bloody deaths. So, yeah, from that point on, it does slightly spiral down. There's a shortcut over the hill, and they encounter this kind of gorge, and Nicky falls over the gorge and he breaks his leg, and it becomes a kind of survival type story, one of those wilderness survival stories, and you don't quite know if they'll all make it. And in truth, they don't all. I suppose that I actually wrote this almost cynically, determined that everyone that read it would cry at the end. And most people do, unless you're totally heartless. But hopefully there's a twist or two so you don't quite realise who isn't going to make it. This was a departure for me. So writing Brock and Pike and Rook and Lark, and it did feel like I'd kind of gone back to those kind of roots. But it might be worth talking about that background of mine, that I was brought up in this small Yorkshire town, which is their Yorkshire town of Sherburn in Elmet. But I went to school in Leeds, in the big city. And the school I went to was a school called Corpus Christi High School, which is a really genuinely tough, scary sort of place. There were fights every single break time. There was really kind of gruesome kind of bullying. And the way the teachers kept control was with violence of their own back in the 70s and 80s. And so that was always a kind of substrate in my work, that kind of, that real brutal working class kind of Leeds school upbringing. And then later on, I spent a long time at university, and that's where the more complex philosophical considerations about literature and the world kind of came in. And so all my early books were that weird combination of those kind of gritty experiences with those slightly more highfalutin philosophical ideas. And I think that's pretty well what I wanted to say. Now I'm really hoping that out there, some of you have got some interesting, challenging questions for me. Fire away. Annie, I can't hear you. Oh,
no,
yeah.
I'm muted. I muted and took my video off so that because of the bandwidth. So if you have a question, can you pop it in the chat, and then we can, if you're happy to have your mic put back on, your camera put on, just let us know and we will ask you, and Bev will switch the camera on for you. So while people are thinking of their questions, maybe I can start with a couple to kick us off. So I think the first one is the obvious one. How did it feel to win?
It felt strange. It was obviously totally amazing to win this prize, because every single children's author knows about the Carnegie Prize, the Carnegie Medal. It's as huge that it looms over our careers because of the history of it, and because of the fact that you get an actual solid gold medal. But then it was in this really strange time for all of us in the middle of the COVID crisis. So it was glorious and strange and wondrous. So I don't know. I actually haven't got the medal yet, so it's not even. I thought I might get a DHL kind of delivery with someone throwing it towards me, but no, still haven't got the gold medal.
Okay, we've had a question come in from Deborah. Deborah, do you want to ask it yourself, or shall I ask it? She's happy to ask it. Can you switch her on, Bev, please? Deborah Perrin. We have to just wait while Bev finds you.
Right. Looking forward to seeing her.
Here she comes.
Yes.
There she is.
So I'm unmuted. That's fine. Congratulations. Absolutely thrilled.
Thank you, Deborah.
We've been very lucky. I'm a secondary school librarian from the right side of the Pennines. That would be Lancashire, by the way. But we actually.
I was actually born in Manchester.
Oh, me too. Yorkshire, that's all right.
I do both. I'm just generic northern.
Yeah, snap. I've got a Yorkshire father, so I'm with you there. But no, congratulations. Secondary school librarian, and one of the things that myself and another teacher who hopefully should be on this tonight, we got permission to run a Carnegie shadowing group. So we've discussed the book and it's been wonderful. But obviously we've been discussing all of the books, and one of the things that comes across is diversity. But your books...
Oh, I've lost the connection.
Are you still there, Deborah?
I am. It just went all a bit funny then. Yeah, I am here.
So do you want to ask your question?
I'll start that again. Yeah, do you deliberately choose to write about boys? Yes, I'm here now.
You know what? I suppose that I do, and that's for various reasons. You know, I've written adult books from a female perspective, and I've written younger children's books from both male and female perspective, but I would never write a teenage book from a female perspective, and that's partly because back when I was a teenage boy, I was terrified of teenage girls. I'm still slightly terrified of teenage girls now, and so you know, most of my friends are adult women, so I understand adult women, I think, quite well, but adult teenage girls are a terra incognita to me, so I couldn't view the world from their point of view, so that they're always on the outside of me. So I tend to write from a teenage male perspective, with girls being these objects of veneration and fear and lust and terror. But also, again, that I suppose that I always thought I was writing for 15, 16-year-old boys, but just because of the way the world is, most of my readers turn out to be 12-year-old girls, because 12-year-old girls read everything. So although in theory I write for boys, in fact I write for girls.
Thank you.
A nice seeing you in the conservatory there.
I know, very nice. It's great. I'm dead lucky. Yeah, it's fab. Yeah, thanks, Bev.
There's a fun comment from Kat saying, you can't write from a teenage girl's perspective, but you can write from a fish.
Yeah, okay, it's a hit. It's a palpable hit.
Jane has put a question in which she's happy for me to ask, is what's your favourite of the books that you've written? She also likes your book collection, by the way.
Oh, behind me.
Yeah.
I curated it especially. Well, it's really hard to know that I think that the author is often not the best judge of what their best book is. I actually genuinely think that Lark is probably be my best book. It came out really well. But my absolute favourite of all my books is actually one of my more obscure ones, Hello Darkness, which is a book about a teenage boy at a school, and they have pets in the school, and the pets are being murdered one by one, and the narrator is always around while they're being murdered, and so he gets the blame for it. So he's got to somehow try and find out who's really killing the school pets. So it's a kind of pastiche noir detective story, but about halfway through you realize that he's called Johnny. He's stopped taking his medication, so he's actually got paranoid schizophrenia, and so you never quite know what's really happening in the world and what's simply his bizarre imagination. So that might well be my favorite book, even though it's my most obscure and least successful. But I think that possibly, I'm pretty sure that Lark is in fact my best book. It just came out right for a change.
Okay, Laura says she just loved Lark. She thought it was a gorgeous book, and she's persuaded her head of English to let her teach it to Year 8. And she asks, if you were reading your book with Year 8 class, what would you focus on?
Oh, blimey. If I was reading it as a teacher, what would I focus on?
Yeah.
Oh, that's so hard. I'm as a children's author, I do a lot of school visits, and it's always quite fun for me because I go in there for an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, and I can be all kind of lively and exciting and interesting. What I couldn't do is go in there week after week and impart knowledge to those young minds. What would I focus on? I think I'd try and focus on the fact that it's an adventure story. So make people want to read it to find out what happens next. And then all those other kind of stuff, the more subtle things about the relationship between the two boys get absorbed almost subconsciously. It's meant to be an exciting story. It's meant to be a story about survival and danger. So I try and get that across and hope that those other more subtle messages also seep in.
Yeah. And a great question here from Suk, who says, as you described your time in Corpus Christi and the bullying you either saw or experienced was in a sense very physical, as time has moved forward with social media and the internet, how much has that influenced or potentially influenced your work with the importance of social media and its impact on children today?
It's such a brilliant question, and the truth is it's barely influenced me at all, because on the whole, when I write about teenagers, I'm thinking back 40 years ago to when I was a teenager, to when bullying was that totally physical thing. Some big kid who'd punch you to the ground and sit on your face and steal your dinner money. So, I mean, clearly now bullying has got more sophisticated and more complex. And I don't know. It's a beautiful question to which I just don't have an answer. I don't know.
Okay.
But I think, but there's still also that old-fashioned bullying does still exist, of having tough kids in tough schools who hit you.
So how do we change?
But how do we change it? Oh God, well, okay, but to give it a slightly more positive spin, I was at school in the 70s and 80s, and then school was a brutal place. I've got, I went to a comprehensive in Leeds. I've got friends who went to Eton and private schools. They were also brutal in their own way. I think that all schools now are genuinely better, that they're more gentle places, they're more understanding places, more nurturing places. So whenever I now go to the kind of schools that I went to back 30 years ago, I'm always struck by how, in fact, how nice the kids are, how nice the teachers are, how there isn't that pervasive threat of violence among the kids and from the teachers to the kids as well. So I think they're genuinely better. Clearly, the whole kind of social media concept of bullying is a scary thing, and it's complex and difficult and awkward. But schools are better. Young people are better, I think.
Okay, and we've got a question from Helen. She says, you've written a series where the children have meaningful relationships with nature. Did you have a strong connection to wildlife as a child? And do you think this is an important part of childhood?
Well, I certainly did. The small town that the boys come from, that I also came from, Sherburn and Elmet, it's kind of weird combination of urban, so there's industrial estates around it, but also you're only a 5-minute bike ride away from the countryside. And so I was totally obsessed with birds and animals as a kid, and these were intrusions of this kind of potential world of beauty and strangeness and wonder into my ordinary everyday life. So it was really important for me, and it was actually the way I became a reader was through my obsession with the natural world. So when I was a kid, at my local library in Sherburn, Sherburn in Elmet, which is my town, the town of the boys, I borrowed for about a year every week a book called The Guinness Book of Animal Facts and Feats, which was this kind of compilation of bizarre facts about the animal world. And by my obsession with those animal facts and feats, I became a reader. So yes, our involvement with the natural world is absolutely crucial. It's just it's an important thing for me, important thing for young people today, I hope. That's a really waffly, terrible answer, wasn't it, to a good question?
I think when I was looking at some of the reviews for Lark, what came through, and having read it myself, what came through is that although some elements within each of the books are quite bleak, there's also a strong thread of humour, running through each of the 4 books. How hard is it to balance when you're writing? How hard is it to balance the bleak with the funny?
Oh, it's a really great question, Annie. In the very first book, Brock, there's not much humour because their family's at the absolute lowest point. But as the series progresses, things get a bit better and there's more space for humour. But also, I suppose I think that it's a really key part of teenage life. If we all think back to our teenage years, they're full of laughter, they're full of jokes, full of mucking about and banter and that sort of thing. And that doesn't often find representation in YA novels. Most YA novels are quite dark and quite bleak, and they don't actually accurately represent that joy of being a teenager. That kind of jokey, mucking about thing you have with your friends. So I really wanted that to be a feature of these books, and it's got bigger and bigger as the books have progressed because their positions got slightly better. The 2 boys at the heart of it. But how hard is it to do? Well, I suppose that something I found with my earlier books was that humour and tension work intimately together in quite complex ways. That a lot of my books do have humour, but humour then kind of deflates the tension of a it's quite a thing to work them both together. But I think if you're going to accurately represent human life and teenage life, then laughter is a key part of it, I think.
Yeah. Again, Suk says there's a sense of adventure in your books. When she was growing up, there were less distractors online, and so many memories were made in exploring the outside world, while now there's more distractions through video games. Do you think that your readers will find a greater respect with the environment and nature through your books?
Well, I hope so. I mean, obviously, essentially, my childhood was were much freer in those days. You basically, after school, you just went out and you built dens and you explored the world. And I think almost as parents, we're more restrictive. We stop our children from exploring the world in the way that we did. And that's a terrifying thing. Maybe that's even worse than the whole social media thing. The fact that young people live online in the way that we didn't. I don't know. I've got teenage children, and I often talk about them about these kind of issues. But I think that their lives are still full of genuine human interaction. I think they still do talk face to face. I suppose, actually, I remember reading recently about the extent to which young people's lives are literary, that they're turned into text. So back when I was a kid, there were telephone calls, there were conversations. That was how you communicated with other human beings. But now young people actually communicate via literature, by written forms, in a way that we almost didn't. So I don't feel too depressed about the way in which young people communicate with each other, interact with the world. They will find their own way.
Okay, a lovely comment from Kat, who says it's the closeness of the relationships between family members and their memories that held the family together. It's like they had so much love, it spilled out into the animals who were also struggling. They became part of their family.
Yes, that was exactly what I was trying to do all the way through the series. I suppose I don't know. I was trying to get across also those complexities of family relationships that often as parents you do your best and you fail, and as teenagers you make mistakes. So, but hopefully that those bonds of love within a family sustain you. I mean, certainly all the way through the series, that the whole point in a way has been that bond between Nikki and Kenny. That's what they're about. And if you read all the way through to the end of Lark, it's a bond that persists to the end of their lives.
Yeah. And actually, I think in many ways, through those 4 books, you really challenge stereotypes. You challenge the stereotype of the family in poverty, because despite all of those issues at the beginning, it is that bond of love, but not just between Nikki and Kenny, but between them and their father.
He tries his best. Yeah. Yes, that was. I suppose that again, the sort of meta narrative thing around this was that I wanted to get across the point that the ordinary, inverted commas, working class lives are full of complexity and difficulty and tragedy and drama. That to you have to go to Narnia or South America or Mongolia to get drama. They're around us all the time. And that working class lives are just as complex and difficult and beautiful and awkward as middle class lives or upper class lives. So that's a kind of key part of this, that you can find drama and beauty and terror and horror in every situation.
I think the other thing that struck me through all 4 is your ability to create visual descriptions, in quite tight, short paragraphs, or tight language. When the hawk attacks the rook, the images of the dead guy and the attacking pike, they do really create, the goosebumps and that feeling of horror. And again, I guess that must be quite hard to write real, strong visual descriptions in quite short number of words.
Yeah, well, there's kind of 2 related issues there, which is the trying to convey the visual world in words. And I'm not actually a very visual person. I'm a very auditory person, so I kind of hear language rather than see language. So I never quite know what the visual effects will be, but you kind of try your hardest. But also then there's the other kind of aspect, which is the fact that Barrington Stoke books are 110, 120 pages long, so everything's going to be kind of compressed and pared down, which I think did make me a better writer, having to focus on every sentence, every paragraph. What is this paragraph doing? Is it working? But I don't know. I suppose our job as writers is to make the reader. Sorry to go back a stage. As we're all very good at decoding text. That's what we do as human beings. So you read a line of text and you can turn it into a meaning in your head very, very easily. But I think that the best type of writing stops that easy transmission of some squiggly lines on a page to meaning in your head, and it forces you to see an image. It makes you see an image in front of you rather than just this kind of weird non-visual kind of conveying of information. So and the way you do that, I think, most effectively through metaphor. So in some ways I see my writing as being a way of stringing metaphors together, because always with a metaphor you're suddenly forced to see something rather than just decoding that meaning straight into a thing in your head.
Yeah. Ben's asked an interesting one. Have you ever got lost in the middle of the countryside? And if not, did you think about researching this book by deliberately wandering around a moor without Google Maps?
So it's a lovely question. The plot of Lark, where the 2 boys get lost in the North Yorkshire moors, it's based on various different things that did happen to me. I've been lost on the North Yorkshire moors in the winter. It's terrifying. I've been lost the Pennines in winter. It's terrifying. And also there was that early school trip along the this kind of gorge through the Yorkshire Dales. But there was one particular time where when I was at university in Manchester, and I went with a friend called Martin Whitehorn, and he was an experienced fell walker, had all the kind of right gear, and it was in the middle of winter, and we were stuck up there in a blizzard. And I didn't have the right gear. Like the boys in the story, I was in my trainers and a kind of light anorak. And he left me on this mountain. He said, "I'm sorry, I'm going to go now." And he had his kind of poles, walk down. And it turned out I was only like 45 minutes away from the local village. But I did genuinely feel that, yeah, I could have died here. So that was always at the back of my mind. And that idea that in England, in the UK, you could have genuine adventures like this.
Yeah.
If
And
you're
actually, I think that comes back to, you know, the point I was saying to you about visual descriptions, and Kat's also commented that you don't, when you're reading it, you don't just see that image, you merge with it. So I suspect everyone that's sitting listening, when they were reading it, like me, felt, oh my God, you just felt like you were there, you know, and whatever happened to Nikki and Kenny was going to happen to you as well. And that's an incredible way of writing. What else?
I suppose that but just on that point, that you particularly care if you've learned to love the characters. So my main job, I suppose, in this series was to force the readers to care about those characters, and so they've invested in them, and so when they're in peril, you feel like it matters.
Oh yeah, Lara has asked, why did you decide not to include the reunion with Nikki and Kenny's mum?
Oh, it was too hard. I tried to think about how it would be, and I couldn't make it happen. You know, it's funny being a writer. You think that you can turn any experience or any idea into words, and sometimes you can't. And I tried to make it happen in my head, and it just didn't ever come out right. So I thought, no, I'd rather just pass on from that, and hopefully that the kind of reader will be able to, if they want to imagine it. But okay, that genuinely was a failure of my abilities as a writer to do that scene.
Well, no, because Laura said she's so happy that you didn't, because she felt it gives the reader so much space to imagine what happened.
Yeah.
So there you are. You did.
But also, I always felt, I don't know, in some ways guilty about the character of the mother, because she becomes a kind of villain because she left them. And so I tried then, as the series carried on, to try and explain why she felt she had to leave, to make her more human, more sympathetic. But I just couldn't make that final meeting in my mind happen, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
I failed.
You didn't fail, not in any way, shape or form. Elizabeth, nice comment, saying she was reminded of the Alan Garner Stone Quartet books, which started as books with vocabulary and became, you know, the classics that they are now.
Yeah, Alan Garner's a huge influence on me. I know most people can most love his fantasy books. They love his slightly more realistic books. I think my favourite YA novel is the Redshift, which I think is an absolute genius, but complex and difficult. But the Stone Book Quartet is also beautiful and simple and pared down. That was definitely an influence on the Brock, Pike, Rook, Lark sequence.
Yeah.
The way he used language so simply and so powerfully.
I think the other comment that, given probably the audience for tonight, I can't let go, is that you are a great believer and a great supporter of libraries, and they do feature very strongly in each of the 3 books, and in a little way in the 4th. Why are they important to you?
Oh, well, I don't know a single writer of my generation for whom libraries weren't absolutely crucial. In my small town in Yorkshire, my parents were not like the parents in the sequence. That they were good parents. I had a really happy childhood, but there wasn't much money in our house. Both of my parents were nurses, so there wasn't much money for books. It wasn't a house full of books. So books for me meant going to the library, the little local library in Sherburn, which is also in the books there. And there was an amazing librarian there who would see what I liked and guide me to what I might step onto next. So I mean, I literally would not be the person I am now without that library, without that librarian. They were crucial. And libraries are slightly different now. So in the sequence, they're also that same repository of knowledge through books, but then also there's a place for access computers. And for Nicky, the narrator of the books, they're a refuge, they're a place of safety for him as well, for this chaotic background. So yeah, library is absolutely key to my own being and also the being of my kids, my characters.
Well, your characters probably feel like your kids at times.
Some ways they do, yeah, they do.
And I have
sorry, my microphone has come out here. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Lead from my microphone came out. Must be okay.
Now we can't.
I've got a really swanky.
Oh, no, we can hear. Yeah, we can hear.
Sorry.
Okay. Well, I'm conscious that we're sort of coming towards the end of our time. But
should I do one last reading?
Oh, yes, please. Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
We don't mind if it overruns by a few minutes. That's fine.
Okay. I thought I might read something from the second book in the series, the book called Pike. It tends to get a bit neglected, and it probably is. It's not the best in the series, but it's got one particular section which I quite like, because one of the key things about the relationship between the two central characters, Kenny and Nicky, is it's based on storytelling. So Nicky tells stories to Kenny all the way through, and there's what Kenny calls stories by mouth. So like just when you make up a story or book, and Kenny actually prefers the stories by mouth because they never end. They go on forever. And this is a story by mouth told by Nicky to Kenny, and it's about it's actually a story I was told myself when I was a kid in Sherburn. So the biggest local employer when I was a kid was this huge big meat processing plant called the Bacon Factory, and next to the Bacon Factory there was a pond called the Bacon Pond, and it was famous for its huge pike. And it was always told to us that the pike became monstrous because they were fed with the rotten meat from the Bacon Factory, the kind of green bacon, the manky pies. So we always, this huge monstrous pike haunted our imagination as kids. So I'm going to read this bit now. So Nick and Kenny are going to go fishing in the Bacon Factory, Bacon Pond. It's slightly rude, this. I hope that's okay. So that was the pond and the pike, I said, but there were also kids, and kids like to do dares. One of the dares was to swim across the Bacon Pond. Even without the pike, it was a stupid thing to do. In places it was so deep, if you tried to dive down to the bottom, you'd come up spluttering before you ever reached it, deep enough to drown, easy. But the deep bits weren't the real danger. There were places where the water weeds could tangle you, and people used to dump all kinds of crap in there. Dead dogs and cats and shopping trolleys and buggies. There was even a car or two burned out by joyriders, then pushed out with the flame still melting the insides of it to fizz in the deeper water. Now the shells of the dead cars and the wire from the trolleys could snare you and hold you there until you got tired and sank down. Then, when you were dead, the eels would chew up your eyeballs and eat your brain, and the pike would tear the flesh off you until all that was left was your bare bones and your teeth and your hair. That was the bit that Kenny liked the best, and he didn't make any noises there or do any actions. Not quite the best, the second best. We weren't at the best bit yet. So the dare was stupid, I said. One very stupid kid called Vinnie Tuck. Vinnie Tuck was a terror of our town. He used to steal from the shops and break the windows and run up to girls and grab them where they didn't want to be grabbed. He was always in trouble with the police, but not bad trouble because his dad had loads of money and he always smoothed things over for Vinny, the way you can when you're rich. Vinny used to boast that he could swim across a pond as easily as he could piss across a puddle. And he said he was going to do it skinny, without any clothes on. So a load of Vinny's thick mates were there, egging him on. He takes his clothes off, right down to his undies, and then off they come, and all his mates give a cheer. Yeah! It was springtime, March or April, and early in the morning, so it's pretty cold. And so his thingy looked like a little blue acorn. Then with a roar, Vinny Tuck splashed into the pond. He ran at first where it was shallow, then slower when the water came up to his waist, and then he went into a crawl. And he was pretty good, Vinny. I'll give him that. Fast and steady. And he put his head right in, even though he didn't have any goggles on. But it was chilly, like I said. And the chill meant that soon his body started to go numb. And then he got the fear, that sense that things were just wrong. His stroke became less steady. The voices of his mates were fainter as he got further away, and his ears filled up with the slimy water. And then he felt it. Something long moving past his leg. That first time, it might not even have touched him. It could just have been the water moved by whatever it was. But it was enough to make Vinny stop dead and tread water so he could look around. Nothing. Then he started again, trying to get back up to speed, but now his strokes were frantic and out of control. The next time, it really did touch him. He was numb with the cold, but still he felt it the way you do when the dentist gives you a filling. And it shouldn't hurt, but it does. The touch of it was smooth and rough. Smooth because all fish have that coating of slime. Rough from the scales beneath the slime. It passed right under his belly. And it took seconds, he felt, to shift its massive length right from one side of him to the other. Like when you slither your belt slowly out through your belt loops. This time, Vinny didn't stop. This time he thrashed with more and more frantic strokes. But he did look down, and he forced his eyes to stay open in the stinging, oily water. And he saw them. Not just one monster, but dozens of them, pike of all sizes, making lazy turns in the water, keeping up with him with no effort at all. Vinny screamed now, choked, coughed, screamed again. His friends had begun to run round the far side of the pond so they could meet him at the bank, and they sensed that something was going horribly wrong. Now, Vinny wished he'd kept his pants on. Even in his panic, he never really thought that the pike would pull him down and eat him the way a shark would. But now I imagine the pike, the big one, spotting his thingy, flapping in the water like a maggot or a worm. He imagined the pike opening its mouth with its hundreds of needle-sharp teeth. He imagined the teeth closing around. Vinny was almost there. He tried to reach down with his toes, and he could just scrape the bottom, greasy with rotten weeds. 2 more strokes, and he'd be safe. At last, his style came back to him. He reached forward into the water like an Olympic swimmer going for gold. Then he pulled back his hand, ready to send his body surging forward like a torpedo. And then... the agony, the terrible agony, fire, ice, fire. It was his thing. It had got it. Teeth sliced, cut, crunched. The great jaws were twisting it free, where a crocodile spins underwater to dismember the body of a drowned zebra. At last, Vinny's feet found the bottom again, and he stood, staggered, fell, staggered again, splashed forward. He was screaming all the time, his voice going from deep below to high-pitched wail. He couldn't look, couldn't stand the thought of what was there. And then he saw the faces of his mates. They were laughing, they were pointing, they were doubled up out of control. One actually fell in the mud and rolled around. At last, Vinny looked down. There it was, attached to his thing, holding on for dear life, a tiny pike the size of a snap pencil. It held on with teeth so thin you could almost see through them, and trickles of blood ran down Vinny's legs to mingle with the green water and the mud and the duckweed that was stuck to him. If the sight of the tiny fish made his friends laugh fit to burst, it had a different effect on Vinny. He lost his wits completely, running up and down the bank, too scared to even touch the fish. The last his friends saw of him was his bare ass as he ran back along the lane towards the town, still screaming out his banshee wail. Sorry.
That was brilliant. Thank you. Oh dear, yes. I've the picture in my head when I read it, and now with you reading it aloud, it's fantastic.
True
So
story. As a story I was told as a kid. Really,
yeah,
Penny's a real
you've
person.
got lots of urban legends that kind of permeate through those books. I love them, the way kids really do believe them.
Yeah.
And you certainly you've given me my mantra for whenever life feels really crappy in the future. In the line in the book, until you're dead, there's always a chance you can make things a bit less shit. And I'm going to put that up on my notice board, because I think it's a great it's a great line. So sadly, I think that kind of brings us to the end of the evening. Except to say, if people would like to buy a signed, personally dedicated copy of Lark at a special price of £8, including postage and packing, then Bev's going to put up the link for you. I'd just really like to say a big thank you to all of you for joining us, to Barrington Stoke and to the Association of Senior Children's and Education Librarians for supporting these events today. And, well, what can I say? A huge thank you to you, Tony, for such a brilliant end to this amazing day. And you said earlier that you know, what you hope is that somewhere in each of your books, when people are reading it, they'll have a little cry. And I thought that you would appreciate this review that I found on Goodreads. And Amanda, who was the reviewer, said, among other things about the book, which she really liked, but she said, I enjoyed it, but I bawled my sodding eyes out. And I have to say, so did I, and I suspect so did the rest of the audience here. So thank you so much. And wherever you are, people, congratulations, and let's give you a big clap. Thank you. So thanks,
Thank you so much. Can I just say, if anyone has any questions that weren't answered, if you want to ask them on Twitter or whatever, I've got nothing better to do. I'm still locked down.
Yeah, and remember, keep reading and keep reading together. And just one last thing, Sarah said, could you just give a shout out for Jack?
For Jack?
Yeah.
Who is Jack?
Hello, Jack. I think he's one of Sarah's students.
Hi, Jack. Read my book.
Yeah, read the book.
Save your life. It might not. It might not.
So thanks, everyone.
Hi, Jack.
Enjoy the rest of the evening, and hopefully we'll see you at a future online event, and at some point in the future, maybe a real life event. So bye.
Bye. Thank you so much. That's really fun.